سیاست در قبال ایران، ماشه و تحریم و ضرورت حسابرسی از رژیم.
اجلاس فوق‌العاده در 10,000 نقطه در دو سوی آتلانتیک در آستانه اجلاس مجمع عمومی سازمان ملل متحد.
سخنان 22 تن نمایندگان ارشد کنگره آمریکا. تام مکلینتاک، پال گوسار، شیلا جکسون لی، راول رویز، لانس گودن، تام امر، جودی چو، جن شاکوفسکی، دان کرنشا، دیوید جویس، رابرت آدرهولت، فرنچ هیل، تد یوهو، براد شنایدر، دان بیکن، جودی هایس، گاس بیلیراکیس، مایکی شریل، راب بودال، لوری تراهان، کاتلین رایس و گلن گروتمن.
Hi, everybody. This is Congressman Tom McClintock. I represent the 4th District of California in the United States House of Representatives. And I am pleased and honored to speak to all of you today. 32 years ago, the Iranian regime waged a brutal campaign of torturing and executing thousands of its citizens who were imprisoned for merely exercising their fundamental human right to express their own opinions. The Supreme Leader's Death Committee sought out those whose political ideas were regarded as incompatible with the theocratic state and ensured that they would simply disappear. To date, the Iranian government continues to deny this atrocity and still frequently calls upon the Revolutionary Guard to wage violence against its own people, peacefully protesting and dissenting from the political regime. Today's Iran is full of impassioned citizens who are demanding liberty, justice, and fundamental human rights. But if we fail to hold this rogue regime accountable, there's no telling what it may decide to do next about those who long for such basic freedoms. Iran is one of the oldest and greatest civilizations in history, but it's been suppressed and plundered by a clique of theocratic thugs who comprise the illegitimate Iranian government. As the mullahs have become more oppressive and extreme, the international resistance to them has become stronger and more resolute. The more the story of Iran is told, of its proud ancient heritage of freedom and civilization, and of its current curse of despotism and terror, well, the more the world has rallied to your cause. In the House of Representatives, I have introduced a resolution condemning Iran's terrorist acts and its nuclear aspirations and supporting the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear republic. That resolution now has garnered 221 co-sponsors, a strong bipartisan majority of the chamber. That so many members of Congress have come together to condemn these terrorist acts and expressed in no uncertain terms our support for the Iranian people's fight for freedom is a testament to the effectiveness and resiliency of the opposition movement. I've written Secretary of State Pompeo to call attention to this resolution, and I am pleased that the United States has taken such a strong stance of support of the Iranian people's quest for freedom. The United States has pulled out of the disastrous nuclear deal that would have lifted sanctions against the world's largest sponsor of global terrorism and allowed it to develop nuclear weapons with no meaningful oversight. Most recently, the United States has pressed the United Nations to extend an arms embargo against Iran. While this effort has faced resistance from certain nations, the U.S. remains capable of utilizing the snapback provisions of the accord to restore all UN sanctions on Iran. These efforts, God willing, will drastically curb Iran's nuclear weapons development. However, there remain foreign leaders who have yet to commit to a stance as strong as that of the United States. That's why it's more important than ever to elevate the voices of the Iranian people who experience every day the consequences of a regime committed to foreign and domestic chaos and terror. It is becoming increasingly evident that Iran's rulers are beginning to fear the resistance. During the massive opposition protests in late 2018, the authorities shut down the internet for more than a week to suppress information about protests and related state violence. When silencing protesters wasn't enough for them, they killed those protesters in the streets. Recently, the regime rejected humanitarian assistance from the United States to share coronavirus treatments, and they sought to convince the world that sanctions were the cause of the coronavirus wave sweeping the country. This despite the fact that the regime has spent over $16 billion since 2012 to fund its terror proxies abroad, while Iranian healthcare services have remained critically underfunded. Now, of course, the Iranian people are no strangers to the lies of its despotic rulers. There was graffiti on a Tehran suburb that summed it all up. It said, "The Islamic Republic in Iran is the real coronavirus." Despite domestic and international acknowledgement of Iran's oppression, the regime has remained intent on provocation and destabilization. They attack foreign oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz and continue using embassies as fronts to plot terrorism. But after the killing of General Soleimani, who was responsible for an incalculable number of killings, the regime has been placed on notice that their acts of international terrorism will be countered by lethal force. Nonetheless, it remains clear that the regime is willing to crush its economy and kill its own people for the sake of nuclear aspirations and spreading terror, further jeopardizing the safety of the Iranian people and threatening the peace of the world. My resolution has gained attention at a time when the Iranian opposition to the regime, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, is steadily gaining momentum and has thus become the main target of the regime's global terrorism. Dozens of the Iranian regime's so-called diplomats, as well as of its agents, have been expelled or jailed by the European nations, including Belgium, France, Albania, as well as the United States, for their terror plots, particularly against the NCRI officials. The Iranian resistance remains as the main target of repression in Iran. Many of its supporters have recently been arrested in Iran for their affiliation with this movement. Last November, the regime murdered at least 1,500 innocent Iranians protesting its cover-ups, its mismanagement, and its rank corruption. While progress has been made, it's clear that today's regime is just as willing as Khomeini's to silence those who call attention to this brutality. True change will require treating the Iranian dictatorship as the international pariah that it is. And it will require providing every ounce of moral and material support that the Iranian opposition needs to rid their nation of this fascist Islamic dictatorship, to restore their proud heritage of Persia, and to restore their rightful place among the civilized nations of the world. To each of you who every day is working toward this glorious end goes the thanks of all of mankind and the respect of every person of goodwill on this planet. Thank you all for everything that you are doing. Godspeed and good luck.
Hi everybody, I'm Congressman Paul Gosar. Although I cannot be with you all as I usually am, the common bond we share in fighting for a free Iran remains united as ever. My colleagues in the administration have reiterated this commitment in recent weeks by triggering the steps necessary to enact the snapback mechanism allowed to them under UN Security Council Resolution 2231. Although some members of the Council have lost their way and have chosen to stand in the company of terrorists, as stated by U.S. Representative Kelly Craft, quote, the U.S. has no fear in standing in limited company in this matter, end of quote. House Resolution 374, of which I'm an original sponsor, condemns Iranian state-sponsored terrorism and expresses support for the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. We are working hard in support for Ms. Maryam Rajavi's and her vision for Iran's future, and will always stand with the Iranian Americans and Iranians inside Iran for their quest for a democracy and a free Iran. I also share in your outrage for the execution of Iranian wrestling champion Navid Afkari by the Iranian government. My sympathies go out to his family, his community, and to your movement. Let's make his sacrifice and all the others propel us towards democracy and a free Iran. Stay strong.
I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and I rise to be able to support the fighters in Iran for human rights and to stand with those like Madam Rajavi who want human rights and to fight against the abuses, the horrible abuses that people are facing in Iran who just simply want justice, equality, and human rights. I'm glad to be a supporter of HRES 188 and HRES 752, 222 sponsors fighting against the 30,000 that were killed in 1988 and all those who are being killed even today, who are fighting against the abuse of those who are standing for freedom. Human rights is a human right, and human rights are deserved by the people of Iran. The freedom fighters, the peaceful freedom fighters who are trying to stand against the regime, they need the support of those of us who love human rights and human dignity. How stunning and shocking that a champion wrestler, Mr. Afkari, was killed simply because he was participating in a peaceful protest. We must have the United Nations investigate these human rights investigations or these human rights abuses. I'm standing for human rights, justice in Iran. I'm standing with the free-thinking people of Iran who want to end the human rights abuses and want a free and independent Iran for all of the people. I'm standing with the message of Ms. Rajavi that we want freedom. We want peaceful freedom, and we want it now. We must have all of our agencies that fight for freedom and to end human rights abuses. They must be standing with the peace-loving people of Iran who want freedom now.
Good afternoon. My name is Congressman Raul Ruiz, and I'm an emergency physician, and I represent California's 36th Congressional District. I was outraged and devastated when I heard about the execution of Navid Afkari, a 27-year-old political prisoner and wrestling champion, on September 12th. The continued violence, the oppression, the internet blackouts, the large-scale incarcerations, the executions, these egregious human rights violations cannot stand. To the people of Iran, I stand with you, the United States Congress stands with you, and the American people stand with you in your pursuit of liberty and democracy. That's why earlier this year, my colleagues and I in Congress passed bipartisan House Resolution 752 to support the rights of the people of Iran to free expression and to say forcefully that we condemn the Iranian regime for its violent, oppressive tactics to crack down on these legitimate protests. In passing this resolution, the United States Congress sent a message. You are not alone in your fight. America supports you in your protest for your fundamental human rights, freedom, and democracy. And while Navid may no longer be with us, his spirit and his mission remain close to our hearts. We will never forget him and the thousands we've lost, and we will keep up the fight until the Iranian people are truly free. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Congressman Ruiz.
Hi, I'm Congressman Lance Gooden from the great state of Texas, wishing you the very best and joining you as we mourn the losses of the 1988 massacre in Iran of your friends and loved ones. I also call on the United Nations to open an inquiry into this massacre. And I also want to wish you all more success as we continue to move forward and fight for a free Iran. I support the 10-point plan that Madam Rajavi has put out, as I know all of you do. I want to encourage you and just let you know that you have friends in the U.S. That are supporting your efforts. We believe that you're making progress and we're making progress alongside you. And I also want to encourage people that are in Iran and that are fighting oppression to stay strong and know that you have friends around the world that believe in you and that believe in a free Iran. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you for your fight, and continue as we move to victory. I hope to meet you in person someday very soon in a free Iran. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom Emmer and I represent Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. I'm excited to support your mission for a free and democratic Iran, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in your 2020 Human Rights Summit. I speak to you during a painful anniversary. 32 years ago, between late July and September of 1988, Iranian authorities arrested and executed thousands of political prisoners. The Iranian government has refused to acknowledge the killings and destroyed burial sites, forbidding commemorations for the victims. This anniversary doesn't just call us to mourn those killed for their convictions. It reminds us just how brutal a government can become in order to suppress free expression. In Congress, I've worked to spread democracy across the globe, especially to the people of Iran. Last Congress, I was proud to support imposing sanctions on Iran to hold them accountable for their human rights abuses. I am also encouraged by the January passage of a measure which supports the rights of the people of Iran to free expression and condemns the Iranian regime for its crackdown on legitimate protests. Too many Iranians have been punished for asking to participate in their own government. Thousands have been arrested or killed as part of legitimate protests, and this violence towards those seeking a free and open democracy must come to an end. Thank you for your hope for a free Iran and for your hard work to make it a reality. Like you, I look forward to the day when all Iranians can express themselves without living in fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu. I'm so sorry the coronavirus pandemic has kept us from joining together in person this year, but I'm so grateful that you found a way to still come together to support human rights in Iran, and I stand with you. Today, we remember the thousands of political prisoners who were massacred in Iran in 1988, simply for having the courage to express their political opinions. But even decades later, Iran refuses to acknowledge the killings or even tell the families where their loved ones are buried. That is because many of those responsible are still in power today, and Iran's mullahs are continuing to oppress their people and export terror. In fact, just this month, we saw the cruelty in the inexcusable execution of Navid Afkari. Was executed in secret after sham trial. But he's not the only one. While Navid's case gained international attention, we cannot forget the thousands who remain in prison in Iran today. And even as Iran battles one of the world's worst COVID-19 outbreaks, the mullahs have made it illegal to even share real data about the virus, making the situation worse. It is important that the Iranian people know that we reject this assault on human rights and that we stand with the people in their fight for freedom and democracy. We also need to reject Iran's support of terrorism and violence at home and abroad. I was shocked but not surprised to read reports this month that Iran's leaders had planned to assassinate America's ambassador to South Africa. This is part of Iran's long history of sponsoring terror attacks against U.S. citizens and officials, as well as against Iranian dissidents, including a planned attack in Paris. The Iranian regime must know that we oppose this violence and oppression. That's why I supported extending the UN arms embargo on Iran, and that's why I am a co-sponsor of House Resolution 374. This critical resolution condemns Iranian state-sponsored terrorist attacks and expresses support for the people of Iran who are engaged in legitimate and peaceful protests against the Iranian regime. This resolution has over 200 co-sponsors, which sends a clear signal to the people of Iran that they are not alone. The Iranian people deserve to be free from the harsh and violent rule of Iran's mullahs, and the world deserves to feel safe from Iranian support for terror and violence. I support your work to establish a free and democratic Iran that works with the U.S. and others to build a safer world. So thank you for all of your important work to promote human rights and a more free Iran.
Thank you so much for allowing me to join you today via video to discuss the human rights situation in Iran. Without a doubt, the treatment that minorities receive in Iran is deplorable. This is a regime that brutally represses minorities and political opposition, violates due process, executes minors, detains foreign nationals, and violates the most basic human rights that any person in the world should ask for. Too many people have disappeared or have been murdered at the hands of the regime. This includes people like Navid Afkari and other human rights activists. The human rights record of the Iranian regime deserves to be condemned by all responsible nations in the entire world. It is incumbent on all Americans to support Iranian Americans and Iranians in Iran in their quest for democracy and freedom in their country. We have to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and other weapons of war. We have to isolate the Iranian regime diplomatically, and we must support activists inside Iran working to secure a better and more peaceful Iran. One thing I can say for certain in these uncertain times is that I will stand with you and, in a bipartisan way, the United States Congress also stands with you. I will continue to fight to hold the Iranian regime accountable and work toward the day that Iran is free, secure, and democratic. And that day will come. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Congressman Dan Crenshaw from Houston, Texas. I join you today because freedom and human rights matter. The Iranian people's freedom and human rights matter. The regime of the Ayatollah has been built for decades on the violation of those rights, with grave and serious oppression and violence against those who dare challenge them. The past few days, we saw the unjust and unreasonable execution of Navid Afkari. We know about Navid because he was an athlete. But how many executions happened that we don't know about? How many more denials of human rights is the regime guilty of? We know thousands were arrested and killed in 1988. We have seen the regime again and again since it came to power exercise its brutality in 1979, 88, 2009, and from 2019 to today, when the Iranian people take to the streets to demand their rights, rights given to them by God, not from the Ayatollah, not from government. The regime has shown who they are. They have shown their violence and they have shown their brutality. We cannot allow the Ayatollah and his corrupt government to continue these atrocities against the Iranian people. And that's why I was proud to support my colleagues in House Resolution 752 and support the rights of the people of Iran to free expression, condemning the Iranian regime for its crackdown on legitimate protests. We want the Iranian people to know we see what is happening in your country and we are with you. That is why 220 of my colleagues and I have joined Representative Tom McClintock's House Resolution 374 to condemn the regime's sponsorship or terrorism and support the Iranian people's desire for a free Iran. We cannot be fooled by the regime like the previous administration was in 2015. There is no moderation with them. There is no peacemaker among them. We cannot and must not legitimize them. We've seen those consequences of those actions as the Ayatollah has exported his terror across the region while ignoring his people at home. We must recognize the brutality of the Ayatollah and his regime, and instead of staying silent and hoping things get better, we proudly and openly stand with the brave Iranian people who are standing up and demanding to be recognized, who are demanding their God-given freedom and respect for their human rights. We support the Iranian people not just because we oppose the Ayatollah, but because we know the Iranian people. I'm proud to stand with you and be your voice in this important and noble cause.
I'm humbled to join you today to commemorate the thousands of innocent lives taken by the Iranian regime. Iran has a notorious history of violence and has long pursued a steady policy of trampling the freedoms of the Iranian people and denying basic human rights. Just this past year, the whole world watched as the Iranian people took to the streets, risking their lives to stand up to a murderous regime and demand accountability. As many as 1,500 protesters were killed and countless others were detained. This is a pivotal moment for the Iranian people, and there can be no ambiguity on where the United States stands. This administration has made it clear that we support the Iranian people. We support democracy. We support freedom, and we always stand by those who seek it. Earlier this year, I was proud to co-sponsor a resolution to condemn the Iranian regime and support those protesting it. It is past time that Iran has put a stop to the senseless violence it commits against its own people. I remain committed to working with my colleagues in Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, to confront the Iranian regime and horrific cruelty and support the Iranian people in their quest for freedom and democracy. As you press forward with tremendous courage, know the American people are with you.
Hello, this is Robert Adderholt, Congressman from the 4th Congressional District of Alabama. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you on such an important topic. The human rights violations we have seen in Iran are some of the worst in the world. The 1988 massacre of the Iranian regime is almost hard to fathom. These innocent men and women were kidnapped, killed, and their bodies dumped into mass graves simply because they disagreed with the government. As Americans, this is a reality that's even more difficult to accept. Sometimes I feel we take our freedom and liberty for granted. It is extremely important that we stand with the people of Iran and for them to know that they are not alone. We must also continue to pray for oppressed people like this around the world and to continue to support them as a government and as a nation. Again, thank you for inviting me to speak to you on this important topic. May God bless you.
For 4 decades, Iran has been a leading state sponsor of terrorism and a clear and present danger. We must not forget the people of Iran are living under the oppression of an extremist Islamic regime that's a persistent violator of human rights and religious freedom. The horrific nature of the mullahs was on full display to the world with the arrest, torture, and execution of 27-year-old Navid Afkari. Despite international efforts, as well as those by President Trump, the Iranian regime executed Navid, a wrestling champion whose only charge was his participation in a 2018 nationwide protest against the clerical authoritarians. This young man with such a promising future ahead of him was executed in secret and without any notification to his lawyer or his family members. We must be supportive of Iran's citizens, such as Navid, who bravely advocate for changes that embrace liberty, freedom, and taking steps towards a more open and democratic government. I support the people of Iran and their efforts to chart a future free from terror and oppression, and I join with thousands around the globe in condemning this most recent brutality.
Hello, this is Congressman Ted Yoho from Florida, and it's an honor to speak today on the plight faced by the Iranian people as the regime continues to violently crack down on their rights to free expression and dissent. We must remember those who have given their lives in the past for a free Iran and a better future for their children, especially the 30,000 political prisoners who lost their lives in the 1988 massacre. To the people of Iran, please know that America stands with you in wanting to provide a better life free from oppression and fear, and we strongly support the fundamental rights of all Iranians to the rights and liberties that all should be free to enjoy.
Hi, I'm Congressman Brad Schneider. Human rights is close to my heart and an essential issue in our global community. Your activism and engagement on the issue is critical. It's how democracies hold the Iranian government accountable for its egregious human rights record. For as long as I've been in Congress, I have advocated for the U.S. government to hold Iran accountable for its abysmal human rights record and its treatment of political opposition. In recent protests against the government over the past 18 months, as many as 1,500 protesters have reportedly been killed for their activism. These most recent actions are part of a decades-long history of the Iranian regime's abuse of its own people, as your organization knows all too well. It is incredibly important that we memorialize the thousands of Iranians who lost their lives in the 1988 massacre of political dissidents. And I commend you for the work bringing a voice to those who have lost their lives. The only crime committed by those lost Iranians, men and women, was their bravery in opposing the government and believing in a system beyond the repressive regime. The Iranian people deserve our support in recognizing the 1988 massacre and other tragedies of the past. And their voices deserve to be heard today as the Iranian people continue to voice their opposition to the Iranian regime. Thank you for the awareness you bring to the 1988 massacre and for lending a voice to the voiceless. I stand with you.
And really focused on Iran. And so I know that I got to learn firsthand the behavior of the government of Iran and how it endangers all of its neighbors. It is the leading exporter of terror, the regime, the government of Iran. But I know we as the American people desire to have a country of Iran that's peaceful with its neighbors, peaceful with us, because we don't want fights. We don't want friction with the Iranian people. I have known so many Iranian Americans and people from Iran that are the most kind, loving, good people that you'd ever meet. So it's not about the people of Iran. We want peace. It's really the regime. And the regime, the mullahs who endanger the neighbors, it's intolerable. But even beyond that, what the regime does to its people is even worse. So the people of America, we stand with the Iranians. We want you to have a country that respects you and a country that plays well and works well with its neighbors. That's our dream. Someday, in my lifetime, I hope that we can have a great friendship with the country of Iran, where the people of Iran and the people of America can be great friends. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Congressman Jody Heiss from Georgia's 10th Congressional District, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak against the persecutions that continue to take place in Iran, as we have recently seen the murder of Navid Afkari. I stand with the President and with our Secretary of State in greatly, strongly coming against this type of behavior. You know, the United States has endured tremendous hostility against Iran for a long time until we took out General Soleimani. And yet the people of Iran continue to live under tremendous oppression. I want to make it clear that we stand with the people of Iran. We stand with them against this type of oppression, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to make that statement publicly.
Hello, this is Congressman Gus Bilirakis. Iran has been a destabilizing and antagonizing force in the Middle East for far too long. The Iranian regime continues to wage a campaign of terror against those who only wish for a free society. We must continue to empower the oppressed and ensure that their voices are not silenced during this difficult time. The United States will always stand with those fighting for the right for free speech and democracy. We will continue to stand with the Iranian citizens until their goal of a free democratic society becomes a reality. Thank you so very much for having me here today, and may God bless you. Appreciate it very much.
مایکی چریل، عضو کمیته قوای مسلح کنگره آمریکا. امسال روشن شد که دفاع از حقوق بشر در ایران بیش از هر زمان دیگری مهم است. من عمیقاً به لزوم برقراری یک ایران برخوردار از آزادی بیان، آزادی مطبوعات و آزادی مذهب اعتقاد دارم. به عنوان یک عضو مجلس نمایندگان به طور مستمر با همکارانم، هم جمهوری خواهان و هم دموکرات ها کار می‌کنیم تا حقوق بشر را در سراسر جهان از جمله در ایران به پیش ببریم. ایرانی ها باید از همان حقوق بنیادینی برخوردار باشند که آمریکایی ها از آن برخوردارند. آنها باید بتوانند آزادانه و بدون ترس از انتقام جویی به رهبرانشان رأی بدهند و نظراتشان را ابراز کنند و مسیر آینده کشورشان را تعیین کنند. من به تلاش برای احقاق عدالت برای قربانیان نقض حقوق بشر ادامه خواهم داد و همیشه از یک ایران آزاد و شکوفا دفاع خواهم کرد.
راب وودال، نماینده کنگره آمریکا، در پیامی خطاب به کنفرانس سیاست در قبال ایران گفت: بیش از 40 سال است که رژیم تهران یک نیروی بی‌ثبات کننده در منطقه بوده، همسایگانش را تهدید کرده، سازمان‌های تروریستی را حمایت کرده و حقوق بشر مردم ایران را نقض کرده است. اعتراضها در سالهای اخیر و پاسخ خشونتبار حکومت، سوء استفاده از قدرت و لزوم برقراری یک جامعه دموکراتیک را برجسته کرد. راب وودال در این پیام افزود: من و همکارانم در مجلس نمایندگان ایالات متحده به سختی برای مقابله با تهدیدات رژیم ایران و حمایت از مردم ایران در تلاششان برای رسیدن به دموکراسی کار کردیم. این مجلس قطعنامه 752 کنگره را در حمایت از حقوق مردم ایران برای آزادی بیان و در محکومیت رژیم ایران به خاطر سرکوب اعتراضات مشروع به اتفاق آرا به تصویب رساند. این کنگره در حمایت از مردم آزادیخواه ایران می ایستد و به تلاش‌ها برای ترویج حقوق بشر ادامه خواهد داد.
I am hopeful that the future will provide us with a more peaceful partner in the region. Sincerely, Rob Woodall, Member of Congress.
Dear friends from Iranian American community of Massachusetts.
لوری تراهان، عضو کمیته قوای مسلح کنگره آمریکا، در پیامی خطاب به شرکت کنندگان در کنفرانس سیاست در قبال ایران گفت: به عنوان نماینده کنگره از صمیم قلب از مردم ایران در مبارزه آنها برای یک جمهوری آزاد و دموکراتیک حمایت می‌کنم. در 32مین سالگرد قتل عام زندانیان سیاسی در سال 1988 من همچنان به یاد نقض فاحش حقوق بشر توسط حکومت ایران طی بیش از 40 سال گذشته هستم. شرم‌آور و خشم‌آور است که تا همین امروز هیچ یک از مقام‌های رژیم ایران به خاطر جنایاتشان مورد حسابرسی قرار نگرفتند. لوری تراهان، عضو کمیته قوای مسلح کنگره آمریکا، افزود: خوشحالم که در فعالیت‌ها برای تضمین اینکه جامعه جهانی بداند مردم ایران به واقع خواهان یک حکومت مبتنی بر جدایی دین و دولت، دموکراتیک و غیر اتمی هستند، همراه باشم و امیدوارم بتوانم بار دیگر شخصاً به شما بپیوندم. در این مدت من و همکارانم به کار برای مقابله با تهدیدات رژیم ایران و حمایت از مردم ایران در تلاششان برای برقراری دموکراسی ادامه خواهیم داد.
Sincerely, Lori Trahan, Member of Congress. To the Iranian
کاترین رایس، رئیس زیر کمیته امنیت مرزی کنگره آمریکا، در پیامی خطاب به شرکت کنندگان در کنفرانس سیاست در قبال ایران گفت: من با افتخار از قطعنامه 47-44 کنگره تحت عنوان قانون حسابرسی از رژیم ایران به خاطر نقض حقوق بشر و گروگانگیری حمایت کردم. در این لایحه آمده است که کنگره این موارد را در ارتباط با قتل عام 1988 دریافته است. طی یک دوره 4 ماهه در سال 1988 1367 رژیم ایران به طور وحشیانه هزاران زندانی سیاسی را به این دلیل که حاضر نشدند عقاید سیاسیشان را انکار کنند به طور جمعی اعدام کرد. در یک فایل صوتی، منتظری که قائم مقام خمینی ولی فقیه وقت رژیم بود گفت: قتل‌های دست جمعی سال 1367 بزرگترین جنایتی است که در دوران حکومت ایران انجام شده و تاریخ ما را به خاطر آن محکوم خواهد کرد. کاترین رایس، رئیس زیر کمیته امنیت مرزی کنگره آمریکا افزود: من از شورای حقوق بشر سازمان ملل می خواهم که نقض جاری حقوق بشر توسط رژیم ایران را محکوم کند و مکانیزمی را ایجاد کند تا شورای امنیت ملل متحد بتواند از طریق آن با چنین نقض‌هایی مقابله کند. ایرانیان در هر گوشه کشور دست به اعتراض زده و در حمایت از یک ایران آزاد متحد شدند. ادامه مبارزه آنها برای حقوق بنیادین بشر قطعاً شایسته حمایت بی‌دریغ ماست. در این کنگره من از تصویب قطعنامه 752 برای محکوم کردن نقض حقوق بشر در ایران حمایت کردم. متعهد می‌شوم به هر صورتی که بتوانم به حمایت از مردم ایران در مبارزه‌شان با این حکومت سرکوبگر ادامه بدهم.
Member of Congress.
I'm Congressman Glenn Grothman from Wisconsin. I'd like to talk to the Iranian American community of Wisconsin as well as the Organization for Iranian American Communities about the situation currently in Iran and the situation in America. I know at this time you are remembering the slaughters of 1988 in which people that didn't necessarily agree with the government even lost their lives. This is particularly irritating because historically, going back hundreds of years, Iran was known for being one of the greatest countries in the world, and one of the reasons it was the greatest countries in the world is they respected everybody, including lands all around Iran. I know you want to return to the days of a time in which Iran was a world leader in human rights, allowing people of all religions and all ethnic groups the ability to meet wherever they wanted, the ability to say whatever they wanted. So I'm glad I had a chance to talk to you today. I hope one of these years, when we meet again, we can meet at a time in which we know that all of your relatives back in Iran are living in a free republic in which they have the ability to worship who they want, talk about who they want, move about wherever they want. Again, thank you for having me.